providing information and support for open faith. And today we wanted to talk about male sexual abuse. There were a couple of things that came up in the news that I also wanted to discuss, but this topic of male sexual abuse was something that I wanted to talk about for a while. We have talked about girl sexual abuse as well, but today I wanted to spend some time talking about male sexual abuse. Now, the initial topic that I wanted to talk about was, why do some people get compassion and others do not when it comes to mental health? I'll talk about it, I guess, at another time, but I was just found it interesting that when we look at our society, how trained we are by the media, how trained we are by what other people say, how we dislike people we don't even know, or it's just how it is. I think about some of the things that happened over the news. We had a lady who clearly has mental health issues, who had stabbed someone at a store. And then we have another gentleman who had plowed his car into a group of people and actually had murdered his mother. And when you look at some of these people's history, again, I don't know what their diagnosis is, but when you look at some of these people's history, it was clear that they were troubled. I think that we, especially here in America, we talk a lot about what needs to be done or what we should do, but we never really step forward and get it done. It's only when something happens, then we want to really victimize or crucify the individual, when the entire time they were crying out for help the entire time, and we just never, as a society, did what was needed to get them, to ensure that they got the help that they needed. So anyway, but I want to also switch over to male sexual abuse. I was listening to a podcast, and in this podcast, I'll give it to is Kevin Gates is on Mike Tyson's podcast. And he started talking about how he was molested as a child, and of course Mike Tyson shared his experiences. And I was going to play a little bit, but you probably won't hear it, so I'll just read it. I'll just read a little bit. And those of you who don't know, Mike Tyson is like a world-class famous boxer, heavyweight champ. Kevin Gates, for those of you who don't know, is a famous rapper. He's a famous rapper, I believe from Louisiana. I could be wrong. But Mike Tyson, Kevin Gates, when you log on to our website or into our YouTube, I'll definitely have their names, and I'll put a link to this interview that they did. But Mike, first of all, as I said, podcast, and this is what he said. It says, during the 15-minute conversation, Gates was asked what led him to his rap career and shared that he was molested when he was a child. It was an escape for me. I'm going to say something. I never said this in no interview, no podcast or anything like that. Gates said at the 4.40 mark of the interview, I grew up real violent and real aggressive. Not because I wanted to be, but because I was molested when I was a child. Okay? Gates explained that he had a fear of being vulnerable, so he began practicing martial arts, which is not uncommon, right? When you've been sexually abused, you say to yourself, hey, I'm not going to never ever let this happen to me again. Some people do become more aggressive. Some people do start taking martial arts. They start lifting weights because they think that if I take martial arts or I start lifting weights, it's going to keep the aggressor or the rapist away from me. That's kind of what they think. Sometimes that doesn't work, because especially when you're talking about when you're young as a child, you really, unfortunately, a child is no match for an adult, okay? Even the dumbest adult, the dumbest adult. A child really is no match, because when you're talking about a predator knows that they're a predator, so they know what they're going to be doing. So they're always looking for angles, they're always looking for opportunities where you as a child may not necessarily, child or person or young adult may not necessarily see that. So when you're talking about abuse, it's never the child's fault, never, male or female. If you're listening to me, it was not your fault. and it never was your fault. Okay, you're not responsible. The onus is on that adult individual or that older individual. Okay. Okay, so Gates explained that he had a fear of being vulnerable, so he began practicing martial arts. I took every kind of martial art you can take. I even boxed. I did everything. I wanted to be the toughest person on earth, but writing and making music was always an escape for me. Like I never had the nuts to come out and say that, he explained. This is my first time saying this today. So basically Gates is saying that this is the first time he shared this openly was on Mike Tyson's interview. And it could be because Mike Tyson himself has a history and has been open about his sexual abuse. Because in 2014, Tyson said in an interview on Opie Radio that he was bullied and sexually abused by an older man who lived in the same neighborhood as him. Speaking with Gates, Tyson related to the rapper's experience. So again, and Tyson went on, I know that route too, added Tyson. Why do you think I became the meanest? Okay, my thing here. Why do you think I became my computer's doing crazy stuff. Why do you think I became the meanest MF on the planet? Somebody did something to me. I don't want it to happen again, so I became this guy. And then Gates went on to say, Gates continued, went on to say that as he started coming out and sharing his story, he just goes on to say how a lot of other people came forward as well. Other men hugged him and, felt comfortable in coming out. And when you look at men in sexual abuse, it's definitely a hard thing. And I wanted to share this. I'm getting this article from Men in Sexual Assault Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services. So this is an article on a website, and again I'll post it as well because I like to make sure that when we get information we share the source. That's why when you go on our website at igbatt.com, we have a whole lot of links, we have a whole lot of information, because I'm always want to make sure that we share the link so that you can have the information. Unfortunately, there are a lot of boys even now as they go back to school. You wonder why they're behaving a certain way, or why they're acting out a certain way, or even men. We wonder why men don't talk, or they don't want to be as vulnerable as we want them to be, and because we're looking at many of them have been sexually abused. Unfortunately, it's not as common for men to talk about their sexual abuse. In America in particular, and I think across the world as well, but in America, men, they have to be strong. We rely on them to take care of their children. We rely on them to be good husbands, to be good fathers. They have to be strong. They have to have this image. So it's hard for them to admit that I was a victim of sexual abuse. It's hard for them to admit to say this is something that happened to me because of what it may have been somebody they knew. Sometimes some men feel like because it's someone I knew, because I didn't say anything, maybe I liked it. Someone begin to question their sexuality. So there's a lot of different things that can go along with it, coupled with the fact that as our society we spend more focus around women, which is a good thing, but we don't spend as much time or discussing it with men. So let me kind of read some of this stuff here. Most research suggests that 10 to 20% of all males will experience some form of sexual abuse or sexual assault at some point in their lives. Okay, so that's a lot of that's a lot of men. Most guys who experience sexual assault choose never to reveal it, even to people they know and trust. There was here, I'm in America. There was maybe about a year ago. With COVID, things are going so fast. But there is this famous comedian. Who had a big fight with his girlfriend and became public news. But one of the issues with him was that he revealed that he too was a victim of sexual abuse, and he had never told anyone. But when he revealed it to her, allegedly she used it against him. She began to weaponize it against him and tease him. So again, that's another reason why some people don't want to come forward. I don't want to come forward and say this is what happened to me when I come forward and then people use it against me. Okay, so it's definitely hard. Male survivors feel they won't be that they'll be disbelieved, they'll be ridiculed, they'll be shamed, that people will talk about them, that people will see them as weak. Okay, they fear that they'll be blamed for their own attack, especially if the male is gay. Okay, because being gay has nothing to do with being raped or sexual assault, being sexually assaulted. But that's how some people think. So we have a lot of even gay men who are been victims of sexual abuse, but won't share it because they don't want people to say, "Oh, see, that look at you, that's why you're gay," or whatever the case is. And then you have a lot of heterosexual men who don't want to share because they don't want people to think that. But I think it's important for men to know, boys, man, if you're listening to me, that definitely was not your fault. So let me kind of go on. Adolescents are most often targeted for male sexual abuse. Men are the perpetrators in a large majority of sexual abuse and sexual assault cases involving male victims. Despite popular belief, most male perpetrators identify themselves as heterosexual. Okay, the reporting rate for male victims is even lower than for females. And let's talk about some of the myths. One of the myths is it says that guys can't be sexually assaulted, and that's not true. There are a lot of men who are men who were sexually assaulted when they were younger. Okay, men can be, and I'm just reading this, and are sexually assaulted every day. It can happen to any guy, regardless of his sexual orientation, size, strength, appearance, occupation, race, or culture. It happens at home, at work, in locker rooms, and in cars. Just about anywhere a perpetrator thinks he can get away with it. It's not unusual for a male victim to freeze out of shock or fear of physical harm. Few, if any, guys have ever considered the possibility of a such thing happening, and therefore they're totally unprepared. Because you don't think about it. Because again, the perpetrator knows what he is going to do, he or she, but they know what they're going to do. You don't know that as a man, and sometimes when it happens, it's a shock. I remember years ago, I met this one guy who had just reported that he was sexually abused, and it happened. They were talking. This was in the military, and they were in the barracks just talking, drinking, and before he knew it, he had been raped, right? And he didn't even didn't realize it, didn't think it was coming. It happened, and before he knew it, it was over. And then now, what do you do with it? And so for a lot of men, they choose not to say anything. They just choose not to, okay, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to keep it in secret. But it impacts you. Because you cannot have something to happen like that to you as traumatic and it not impact you. It impacts the way you deal with other people, men. It impacts the way you deal with your wives. It impacts the way you deal with your children. It impacts just how you deal with your life. A lot of men are just uber aggressive, and they're uber aggressive not because they are necessarily aggressive people or men. They're aggressive because of what happened to them in the past. Okay. Another myth that only gay guys are sexually assaulted, and that's not true. Because remember, the assault is not about you. It's not about you. It's about the individual. They're the ones with the issue, the problem, not you. Okay? Guys who experience child sexual abuse will grow up to become abusers themselves. Although premature sexual experience often cause profound emotional damage to boys, most male survivors don't repeat the abuse that happened to them. In fact, statistics show that many men who commit sexual abuse or sexual assault actually suffered from something other than child sexual abuse, most likely physical or emotional abuse, or witnessing domestic violence when they were young. So what am I saying? There is this fear that, okay, if I was sexually abused, then I may go on and be to sexually abuse someone else. Sometimes that can happen, but it's not that's always the case. It is not overwhelmingly the case. What we're saying here is that when you see situations where a man who was sexually abused grows up to be a sexual abuser, there's usually some other things that was going on with this individual, such as a lot of other violence, a lot of other physical abuse, a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of disruptions in the home. There's some other stuff that's going on with them. Okay, so just because a person was sexually abused themselves doesn't mean that they go on to be sexual perpetrators. Now I know what does happen sometimes when a person is sexually abused, a man is sexually abused, 'cause that's what we're talking about today, is sexually abused as an adolescent, he or she may begin to experiment with certain things. Because when you're sexually abused, especially as a young child, you don't know who you are. You're confused. You don't know if you're a man. You don't know if you like women. For some men, they're confused. And so they try out different things before they begin to realize who they are. And that is the damage when we talk about trauma. When we talk about, here as being a faith-based broadcast, I always say God has come that you might have life and life more abundantly. The enemy has come to kill, steal, and destroy. So the enemy will come and kill, steal, and destroy by sexually abusing a child. Because he knows that once he can sexually abuse that child, then that trauma, if you don't get over it, you don't deal with it, you don't deal with what happened to you, then you're going to impact someone else. It's going to limit your life. It's going to stunt your growth. It's going to cause a negative impact in how you parent your children. It's going to be a negative impact in how you deal with your wife. There's some of you men who have children, you're not in your children's life because you don't know how. You have that fear. You have that distance because of what happened to you. Okay? A myth: guys can't be sexually assaulted by women. That is a myth. Women can't induce sexually abuse and assault men. But it rarely gets reported because a lot of times, how the way our society is, and then the way other people view it. Oh man, a woman sexually assault you. Let me say something, women. It is not. You're not doing these young boys a favor by sexually assaulting them, okay? You are a perpetrator. You are, and should be arrested, just like the man who does it as well, okay? There's nothing sexually appetizing about that at all. You are damaging that individual, that boy, basically for the rest of his life, okay? This is another thing. Getting erection or ejaculating during a sexual assault means the survivor really wanted it or even consented. And this is a big one here. People feel that because my body gave into it, because my body did certain things, it must mean that this is what I really wanted. This myth causes major issues of guilt and confusion for male survivors. Physical stimulation can cause an erection whether the recipient wants it to happen or not. Pressure in the prostate gland can cause the same reaction. Having an erection or ejaculation is a normal, involuntary physiological response and does not automatically equate with arousal or with consent. A male survivor, may feel confused, okay? I don't want this, but what's happening? Why am I getting an erection, or why am I ejaculating? You're getting erection and you're ejaculating because it's normal, okay? It doesn't mean that you want it. But for a lot of men, that carries a lot of guilt, that carries a lot of shame, because then people will say, well, or you think people will say, well, how could you be raped? When you became aroused, you got an erection, so you must really wanted it, and that's not the case. Your body is going to do what the body will do whenever it comes in contact with that, okay? If the perpetrator is a woman, a boy or teenager should consider himself to have been initiated into the exciting world of sex. No matter who provokes it, a relative, babysitter, teacher, boss, or other woman in a position of power or authority over a young male, this is about control, domination, not gratification and pleasure. You didn't want it. You were a victim of sexual abuse. That woman sexually abused you. I don't care how much she spoke to you, how sweet she spoke to you, what she gave you afterwards. It was rape, okay? Males who are sexually assaulted don't suffer as much as females who are assaulted. After all, they don't risk becoming pregnant. That is so not true. All sexual abuse survivors feel the same reactions, okay? Depression, anger, anxiety, confusion, fear, numbness, self-blame, helplessness, suicidal feelings, and shame are common ones. Let me read this again. And again, I'm reading this different myths. Males who are sexually assaulted don't suffer as much as females who are assaulted, and that is so not true. And that's the reason why we have so many aggressive males. That's the reason why we have so many detached males, because we think society has made us think that, oh, that's just a guy, he'll get over it, he'll be okay. That is not true. All sexual survivors, male or female, go through some of the same feelings. And some of those common ones are depression, anxiety, anger, confusion, fear, numbness, self-blame, helplessness, suicidal feelings, and shame. Everybody goes through those, okay? Some responses are gender specific, others are not. Okay? And while men don't get pregnant, male survivors of anal rape are at a high risk of internal damage, which leads to a greater possibility of HIV infection. Okay? Okay, impacts, like I said, on boys and men who have been sexually assaulted. Anyone who has been sexually assaulted or abused, male or female, experience lasting effects of their sexual abuse. Okay? Anger, anxiety, sadness, confusion, fear, flashbacks, numbness, self-blame, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness, suicidal feelings, shame, sexual dysfunction. Okay? But now, what we notice here, but guys also display some unique reactions in the aftermath of sexual assault. So what I read is something that everybody has, all survivors have in common, which is the anger, the anxiety, sadness, the confusion, fear, flashbacks, numbness, self-blame, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness, suicidal feelings, shame, sexual dysfunction. But what we've noticed with men, there are certain additional feelings that they may have. Number one, they show more hostility and aggression than tearfulness and fear. And I believe when I read that article with Bill Gates, saying Bill Gates, Kevin Gates, he talked about that. He and Mike Tyson, they both talked about this. They're showing more hostility and aggression than tearfulness and fear. May begin to question their own sexuality, identity, or orientation. They begin to act out in sexually suggestive ways, and they downplay the impact of their experience. Okay? Again, like women, men also can have PTSD, suffer from depression. Again, their symptoms may look differently. Because our culture, again, our society tends to minimize sexual abuse when it comes to men. Okay? So men don't, as I said before, they don't usually disclose. When individuals disclose an assault or abuse, they are often accused of lying or told that the crime is in some way their own fault. People will tend to fault a male victim instead of the perpetrator. Male survivors often have to confront unsympathetic attitudes, especially if they choose to report the crime, and they may lack support from family and friends for doing so. I remember in school we had one of our classmates, he was sexually assaulted, raped by his uncle. And it got out, I guess everybody knew. And I remember the first day he came back to school and just how alone he must have felt. At the time, I didn't see it that way. I just remember him coming back to school, and he was coming back onto he was coming into the playground, and everybody just got quiet and just kind of looked at him. And I can only imagine now as an adult how that felt. How that felt, because everybody knew what happened to you. Some people didn't believe it. Some people thought it was his fault. Some people felt he should have done more. So it hurts. It definitely hurts, okay? So first of all, how do you help? Number one, believe him. If he tells you that I was raped, believe him. Even if it happened as a child, believe him. Talk to him about options, okay? If we need to report it, don't report it. Listen to him, okay? And then also, you want to make sure that you take the lead as far as what he wants to do. Now again, if we're talking about a child, that's a little different, because if you're talking about a child, a young adult, you should report it. But when you're looking at adults, sometimes it's not as clear cut, because they're in their 30s, their 40s now. The person who sexually abused them is dead. The person who sexually abused them has moved away. But one of the things I will say, from just talking to some people, if you are a male sexual abuse victim, and if you feel like you want to confront the individual, then that is your choice. You are not responsible for how the person, you're not responsible because you were the victim. And however you as a victim choose to heal is how you choose to heal. Now, some people may not. Some people may say, no, I'm going to let it go. I'll talk to the person privately, or I won't say anything, or I'll get help. I'll talk to my wife. I'll talk to my pastor, and I'll begin to work it through. Then that's fine. And then there are other people who will choose to confront. There are other men who will choose to say, confront the individual, and that's okay. Whatever you choose to do, it's okay. Whatever you choose to say, it's okay. Okay? Because you're the victim. This is your story. You have the option to do what you want to do. No one has the right to tell you, oh, I wouldn't do it that way, or I would do it this way. Whichever way you do it, just count the cost and think about the impact that it would have on you. Okay? You're not responsible for protecting your perpetrator. You're not responsible for protecting the person who sexually assaulted you. Okay? You're not responsible for his feelings or her feelings. Okay? You're not responsible for them. You are the victim. And I think that's so important to realize. You were the victim. If this was not something, I don't care if you were walking around with no clothes on. You were a child. This person is an adult. It is not your fault, okay? And I think that's so important. So when we talk about Jesus Christ, who's come, that we might have life and life more abundantly, he has come through His Word. His Word lets us know, right, that you, male, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. What happened to you is not your fault, okay? I think it's important that more men come out and start talking about, what happened to them. And, sometimes it may be not necessarily one-on-one, but one of the things, like I like when Kevin Gates said that he just started talking about it. That was the first time he had talked openly about it, even though he had it in a song previously. So sometimes that may work. Sometimes it may work for you is that when you're a group of other men, just say, hey, this is what happened to me, right? As opposed to maybe just telling one person. Because some people feel like if I tell this one person will have a hold over me, so I'm not going to share anything. So for some people, it's better to share it like out in the group. Because one of the things, as you share it, you'll be so surprised how many men have the same type of story. How many boys are dealing with the same thing. Right? You'll be surprised how many men who are in prison, how many men who are in jail, penitentiary, who are victims of sexual abuse. You'd be surprised. You'll be surprised how many drug dealers, pimps, how many men who are beating their wives or beating their girlfriends, how many of them have been sexually abused. Again, it doesn't excuse their behavior now. I'm just making a point. Okay? I think it's so important that people begin to share what's going on with them, because the Bible said there's no temptation that's taken you that's not common to man. In other words, there's nothing that you're going to go through that someone else hadn't gone through. So you don't have to live in depression. You don't have to continue to let fear. You don't have to unexpressed anger get the best of you. You can express it, because by you expressing it, you're getting free, by telling your story, and you're also freeing someone else, okay? So I just wanted to kind of share that. When we talk about men and sexual abuse, let's just remember that men, boys, adolescents, children can also be victim of sexual abuse as well. I think that's so important. What I wanted to see if I can do, I wanted to find that Kevin Gates song, and I can share it with you. It's a little raw, so for those of you who listen to my channel, yeah, it is a little raw. So some of you might be a little offended, but there's a part in it that I think it's really great, using the music to speak to so many other men who've been sexually assaulted and abused, and even Mike Tyson, who's sharing, if I can find it. And And if I could, I'll find. If not, I'll post it. But if I can share it, I definitely would like to do that. Just to kind of give you a little taste of the song. Okay, okay, you can hear me talking in it. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Yeah. And okay, that's what I'm going to play of that. I'll just go ahead and post it. But one of the things he talks, I said in the song, Kevin Gates, he talks about, and the name of the song is Fairy Tale. So he talks about his being sexually abused, but he also talked about a suicide attempt, which is not uncommon as well. Because when you are dealing with that kind of pain and you don't have anybody to tell, you don't really have an outlet, it continues and no one believes you, depression can quickly become suicide thoughts or death by suicide. So again, I just wanted to share this with men, especially as we go back to school. Some of you boys, mothers, parents, your son is going to be going back to school. He'll be going back to school with that particular coach, that particular Sunday school teacher, that particular pastor, that particular male or female, that particular bus driver, that particular older kid. And I think it's so important that you also have to pay attention to older children as well. You know, a lot of times when parents have, get-togethers and they have parties, you are in one room, everybody, all the adults in one room, and all the children are in another room, and nobody's supervising them. So you have younger children, younger boys, that are sometimes being molested by older boys. And how did the older boys learn it? They learned it from sometimes they were molested, or they learned it from pornography. Unfortunately, a lot of people may not raise your children the way you raise yours. There are some people who are really, really into pornography, and they don't pay attention to their children. Their children are really into pornography. You have kids as young as 12, 13, 14, and even younger with porn addiction, right? Because of what they see on YouTube, what they see their parents do, because of the strip club society that we live in, and just a whole lot of stuff. So they're there. And for many times, the older kids, it's not necessarily about a sexual abuse thing. It's about experimenting, right? They saw it, so they want to find somebody to practice with, okay? They don't really understand what they saw, but they saw, maybe their mother's boyfriends or their father's girlfriends, and they see it, they see the joy, they see the pleasure, they don't really understand it, and they want to try it, and they find your child to try it on. So you got to be careful with that. You got to be careful with, whenever you have these get-togethers and parties, that you're paying attention. You're not so into your playing cards with your adults that you don't know what's going on in the other room with your children, right? Or with other people's children, because again, boys are being sexually abused there as well. Also got to pay attention when you let your kids go spend the night. You can't let your boys, I'm talking about boys, but children in general, spend the night with anyone. You got to make sure that you know the people who they're spending the night with, and that these people are reputable people, and that you trust. Because I've known some people who went to spend the night. One lady in particular, she went to spend the night with a pastor, right? And she was sexually abused. And the sad thing about it is that the pastor's wife knew it. Okay, so you can't just assume that just because someone is, the president of the United States, a lawyer, a doctor, somebody reputable, that you think because of their title that they wouldn't do such a thing. Because I'm telling you, sexual abusers, perpetrators come in all shapes, forms, sizes, sexual orientations. I was working with another gentleman, when he was young. He's a man now, but when he was young, he used to talk about how his grandmother, in a sense, the grandmother just pimped him out, is what she did. But he didn't understand it at the time, that, there was a older guy in church, they played music, and he would go over to the guy's house, this grandmother would take him over to the guy's house, and he said things started out, fine. They would, I believe, watch TV or whatever they were doing, and then one day the guy would say to him, wanted him to take a bath, wanted him to take a bath. Why do I need to take a bath? So he did it, but the guy didn't do anything because what the guy was doing was grooming him, right? Want to make sure you take a bath. You're hot, sweaty. I don't want you to go back to your grandmother's house. And before you knew it, the guy had raped him. But what he realized later is that his grandmother kept taking him back, right? His grandmother kept taking him back, even though he had told her what happened. So once she kept taking him back, and he didn't, she told him, it brought on even more confusion, right? So again, I don't care who they are. You can't. You have to use. Sometimes you just really have to use. I don't want to use the word common sense, but sometimes you have to really think, right? Why is it that this older man loves just being around a whole bunch of young kids all the time at his house? Okay, and again, I'm not talking about teachers, even though you have to watch them as well. But what I'm saying is, in certain situations where you're going to drop your kid off, oh yeah, you can go by and stay with Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones, and they're going to watch you for me. Okay, your kid is like 11 or 12, 9, 10, 11, 12 or whatever, and you're dropping them off. Well, okay, when you drop them off, you need to be calling, you need to pay attention, you need to ask some questions, you need to figure out why this adult doesn't have any other friends. Why does this grown adult doesn't have any other friends but just these children? Okay, why is it he always want to play video games with just the kids? And again, there are some adults who like, who are legitimate, who are fine, and that's just the way they are. I'm saying you just need to be careful, because sexual abuse happens. Boys are being sexually abused every day by teachers, principals, professors, doctors, lawyers, police officers, apostles, prophets, teachers, evangelists, their fathers, their older brothers, their older cousins. You as the parent, you have to be diligent. And as the adult, if you don't have any children, you need to be that third eye or that second pair of eyes or whatever the case is. So again, men, if you are a victim of sexual abuse, I think it's important that you hear me, that I slow down and say this. It was not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. It was not something that happened that you wanted to happen. Even though you may have felt like because you had an ejaculation, you ejaculated, that it was something that you wanted, that is not the case. Talk to someone. You can always talk to God about it. Begin to verbalize it. Sometimes you may have to get in the mirror and say, I was raped when I was 12 and I'm angry about it. Okay? And admit the fact that you were angry. The reason why you're so angry is because you're not bringing it up to the surface, because you're trying to stuff it in. I always say that our feelings have a way of coming to the surface. You have a wound, you put a Band-Aid on it, but if you don't really clean out the wound, then the wound really won't heal properly. You just have a Band-Aid on top of it. And sometimes, men, you just have a Band-Aid, your anger, your aggression, your sports, all the different things that you do to forget it, but you're still not dealing with the actual pain, what's going on. So now you got to pull that fake Band-Aid off and let that wound clean it out and let it begin to heal. And sometimes healing by it is by talking about it, or at least acknowledging it. Again, everyone doesn't need to see a therapist. Everyone doesn't need to, people process things differently. The thing is just making sure that you actually process it and talk about it, and not just let it stay there and become depressed or being anxious or worried about it. Again, It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach. You can email me at igbatt1@aol.com. Again, go to our website, igbatt.com. You'll see the links that I'll make sure to put on our website that you'll have for the Kevin Gates interview with Mike Tyson, as well as the article that I read from. Okay? So again, remember, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. God bless you, and stay in